All right. Can you both see that?
Yes, I can.
Yep.
Anyway.
Okay. So try and yeah. Okay. So it's pretty short presentation, but just wanted to capture some basics of the setup, the hardware and software, and then I'm going to focus on YouTube and Church Online because those are pretty opaque to most of the operators. You know, you have a little bit of interaction with YouTube and yet Church Online, but for me, it was a bit of a mystery how the two fitted together, and then a bit about catch up and how that works. So do interrupt and ask questions as we go through. That'd be the best way, I think. So the components, probably familiar with most of these. You've handled the cameras, the camera controller, video switcher, the PC. You may not have handled the encoder, and that's the thing that says streaming on the front with the red button. You probably won't have noticed the network switch, but that's gives its own little network for the actually most of the stuff in the main church. Gives power over Ethernet to the cameras and connects all the other bits together, and then is connected through to the main rack in the storeroom out to the internet, and it gives a high-speed internet connection. So there's dedicated bandwidth on that connection. And then the big software components that we use are YouTube and a thing called Church Online platform, which you'll have seen as live.ccwench.org.uk, but you won't necessarily have twigged that it's a separate platform because it's nicely wrapped up. Okay, any questions on those?
No, sounds good.
Good. So the basic components, this may be entirely obvious to you, but it wasn't obvious to me, so I'm going to go through it, and I'll make this presentation available afterwards, so you can always refer to it. But the key component really is a video switcher, which gets all the inputs and decides what to send to the encoder and out to the stream. And quite separately is the camera controller. So you'd be aware that we've got two sets of cables. We've got SDI cables running to the cameras, and they essentially go to the video switcher via the rack. And then Ethernet, which the camera controller is plugged into, and the cameras are plugged into. So the other two inputs are the sound from the sound desk and camera 5, which is the AV desk, the videos and so on that are played on the AV desk. And then there's the streaming PC, of course, and we can control the encoder, the video switcher, and the cameras to some extent from the PC. Does that look plausible?
Yep.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. So once we go out beyond the encoder, it starts to get more interesting or more obscure, you might say. The key component is a stream on YouTube. That's like a configured item on YouTube that represents a service. And the encoder uses a protocol, Rtmp, to send streams up to YouTube. And that requires you to have a URL to tell it where to send the stream to, and a streaming key. Some examples there. And that sort of authenticates the encoder to YouTube and says it's able to write to this stream. And that's quite a complex protocol. We don't need to worry about it really, other than making sure that we have the right streaming URL and keys in the encoder. And the way we do that typically is by copying one YouTube stream onto the next one, so that we preserve the URL and the key because they're the same for each service. And then, so when we actually kick off a stream, when we go live, that creates the stream on YouTube, and that can run as long as you want, really, until you press stop or end streaming, whatever it is. So it's not fixed at a particular duration, but it's got a scheduled start time just to give YouTube some idea for capacity planning, I guess. So that's the kind of the basic idea, that we stream to a YouTube stream, and then people can kind of view the YouTube stream. But the YouTube stream is unlisted, which means that you can't find it on YouTube, try as you might. So, and the reason for this is to encourage stroke force people to use Church Online, which is a separate platform that we use for live.ccwinch.org.uk, which you will have seen, I dare say. Have you both seen that?
Yes, watch every so often.
Yeah, yeah.
And the times we can't make it into church, we watch it.
Yeah, yeah. So live.ccwinch.org.uk is really a DNS C name that points at ccwinch.online.church. That gives you the same user interface. And ccwinch.online.church has got, it's one of two things. It will either display the YouTube playlist when there isn't a current service running. And so you can go to live.ccwinch.org.uk and you can see the playlist and pick off the, well, it will typically play the last service, and we'll talk about that later. Or if there is a service currently running that Online Church knows about, then it will display the YouTube stream. And that's because the service is configured with the URL of the YouTube stream. And this is a different URL to the Rtmp URL that the encoder uses. It's just a normal HTTPS jobby, a sort of stream URL that you'll be familiar with for YouTube. So there's two different ways of addressing that YouTube stream from either the encoder or from Online Church. But basically, it's all held together by the YouTube stream.
The playlist on YouTube that it gets the old videos from, that's private, but allowed to be shared to ccwinch.online.church.
Well,
Is that right?
Yeah, it's just that they're not listed. So in actual fact, if you go to the playlist, you can find the videos on YouTube, and you can actually then access them directly on YouTube if you know what you're doing. You know, if you look for the right URL, you can actually get them directly.
Okay, so they are visible, but just kind of hidden away. Yep.
It's just they're just obscure because they're not listed, as it were, not findable.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, but there's no security as such.
Yep, understood. Glyn, you may cover this later, so forgive me, this is out of place. But you sort of mentioning the scheduling of the streaming on YouTube, sort of beforehand. So that I believe there was a problem a week or two back where someone used up that slot.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know how. I'd imagine starting and stopping, the video, and having stopped it, it was then used up. And,
yeah.
I'm guessing that's what happened.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So,
are you aware of how? Will you be covering how to schedule a slot in YouTube? Because I'm guessing a fresh slot was scheduled to resolve that issue.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the exercise I was proposing us to do this evening.
Yeah. Okay.
So we've got one that's been clobbered already. I noticed.
Yeah.
So it's quite convenient to get that sorted, and it's quite a difficult one because when you come to go live, the icon for going live on the stream that's already been played is just grayed out, and you've got no clue until you notice that it's already been played, already been run rather.
Yeah.
So it's quite a subtle problem.
Yes, no useful message.
It's obvious when you are used to it, but no useful message. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
The first time you come across it, you'll be like, I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll be able to solve that by the end of this, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions on this one?
What does Rtmp stand for?
Oh, right. Something like real-time messaging protocol. It's something pretty bland, but basically it's a kind of multi-streaming protocol. It's bidirectional, and it allows things like RPC calls and stream packets to be passed up, typically from the encoder to YouTube. But they too can negotiate things like bandwidth and latency and that kind of stuff. So it's quite a sophisticated protocol.
Cool.
Yeah, it's on Wikipedia if you want to read more.
Yeah, I'll have a look. I've never heard of it before. I do lots of HTTP and HTTPS stuff. So.
Yeah, me neither. It's quite interesting. I don't actually know what goes on the shareable stream URL. I presume it's just kind of a MP4 video format that comes down, but I don't know the details of that. But I think that's more standard web browsing. the way that any video would be played.
Yeah,
With.
YouTube probably explains how they do that streaming. I'll have a look for that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Yeah, thank you. Okay, we'll move on if that's happy with that.
Yep, it's good.
Okay, so let's look at the YouTube configuration and then the Church Online configuration. So the title is a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically this is how you configure it. This is how you schedule a stream. So you go through you'll see the menus later, but you basically go online and then you schedule the stream. So the inputs, some of them are pretty obvious, like the title. And this title is really just for the operators mainly, because most people don't see it. I guess you might see it in the playlist, but the crucial thing is that the operators know which stream is which. So we've got the 11 or 7 service and the date. We should probably start adding the year to that, because it'll become confusing come whenever it is next year, when we start overlapping the months we've been streaming this year.
Okay, so is that suggesting that there's no sort of clear down policy?
Well, that's a good question. There isn't yet. Maybe there should be. And there is a change coming up, which I may talk about later, which may force us to do a certain amount of clearing down when we move to a brand URL, a brand account for YouTube. But we'll talk about that later. It's not crucial. The other thing is we have a scheduled start date and time configured in that, but it still depends upon you to go live. Nothing happens at 10:55 on the 26th of September. It will just sit there until you say go live. So I'm guessing this is for your, for our own reference, and maybe for capacity planning for YouTube. Then there's a latency setting. And that's quite interesting. There's normal, low latency, and ultra low latency. And this is basically the time delay between the stream being sent by the encoder and it being displayed by YouTube. And we decided to set that to low latency, which is a trade-off between absolute top quality of the picture and keeping closely in sync. And I think the only benefit there really is that if we as operators have to interact with the audience or the host on Church Online, then we're talking about roughly similar time events. So if something goes wrong, it's nice to know that it's, we're talking about the same thing rather than something that happened 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
I think we could probably live with normal latency actually, but Craig thinks that low latency is probably the best one.
And this is about, what, 30 seconds? Or
something of that order, yeah. 30 seconds to a minute.
Yeah.
It's not too bad. But it makes for an interesting effect with the countdown, which I'll show you later on the diagram. Okay. Then there's an optional playlist, and we typically add all the YouTube streams to the online catch-up playlist when we create them. So the catch-up includes future streams that haven't yet been streamed, which might be confusing. We might want to change that and just add them to the catch-up stream afterwards. But this is one way to avoid forgetting to add them. At least people can find them. And it might be handy for people to find future streams if they're doing something like, if they find some way to get to a YouTube stream on a smart TV, for instance, that doesn't have a web browser, then they might be able to use a playlist to do that. But that's not something we support or encourage. It's just, that was just in the back of my mind, since we've got a Humax that doesn't allow you to have a web browser. We configure them as not made for kids. It's not that it's unsuitable for children, but this gives the full capacity of chatting, which online church uses. And haven't quite figured out the relationship between online churches chat and the chat in YouTube, whether they're the same thing or not. I'll have to investigate that, but certainly you need to have not made for kids so that we can get the right kind of chat to occur. And I mentioned before, they're unlisted to kind of encourage people to go via live.ccwinch to get to them, rather than just picking them up on YouTube and not being listed in the audience numbers. So this is helpful for them because they get a better interactive experience with the option of asking for prayer and chatting to other other attendees. But it also means that we get to see accurate numbers of connections of people using the online church. And there were 40 odd on Sunday morning, so it's a good number. It was a good number then. That might be 60, 80 people.
Yes, what I didn't look at on Sunday, maybe you've already looked at this, is where they're coming from. Are they local? Are they Christchurch members? As we assume they're local, or perhaps they've moved from across the country. Maybe even David Rowe is dialing in every.
It's possible, isn't it? Yeah. We'll have a look at the analytics later if I remember, see if that's listed. I know that some people dial in from Killerway, for example.
Okay.
So it is used by people outside Winchester.
Yeah.
You should be able to find that on YouTube itself, on YouTube Studio.
Okay.
You can look at the analytics on there, apparently.
Okay. Yeah. Let's have a look at that.
Good.
And then the outputs are the URL and the key, stream URL and key, which are used by the encoder. But that's only if you're creating an entirely fresh stream.
That URL and key are the same every time?
Yeah. Okay. So the way we create them is we copy from an existing stream, and then that's output is the same every time.
Yep.
And the other one is the shareable URL, so-called, and that's different. That's unique for each stream, and it exists before the stream is actually run. So if you put that into a web browser, you can see that it's a stream that's about to, will be streamed in the future, and you can kind of see a thumbnail. And then when it's actually being streamed, you can view the content.
Does that only come live when you hit the 10:55 time, or is that live before that?
Right. That's a great question, but let me defer it because I've got a timeline.
Okay, cool.
The slides further on, which will talk about that. Sorry, any other questions on this one?
I think that's all good.
Okay. It looks quite fiddly, but it's actually quite straightforward once you get into it. Then the Church Online configuration is on a separate platform, Church Online. You can access it via the live.ccwinch URL, and you need to be given admin privileges to see the service configuration, which we can give you. And the inputs there are the service title, and this is what the viewers will see. So we tend to put the scripture reference in there if we've got it, and the title of the sermon. The duration, we've settled on 1 hour and 20 in the hope that we don't exceed that, because I think what happens is at the end of 1 hour and 20 minutes, it stops broadcasting.
It definitely does, because it happened to us the first week.
Oh, yeah.
It was scheduled for 1 hour and it just literally got to the hour and went, right, done.
Yeah. So if revival breaks out in the middle of one of our services and it runs to 3 hours, we'll have to think of something else. But until then, we're okay.
Get a new stream up quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the YouTube stream will be okay. It'd be the Church Online thing. And the question is, can you fiddle with that setting dynamically? And I suspect you'd be lucky if it was dynamic.
Yeah.
But you might need to do something like...
Does it matter if it's set to like 3 hours? Because we're going to stop it after we finished anyway. So
yeah, that's an open question, actually. When I show you the timeline, we can discuss the impact of that. But my basic question there is, does that mean that the playlist wouldn't be visible, or the previous service wouldn't be visible at live.church, live.ccwinch for that duration? Because if somebody comes along and they said, oh, it's 1 o'clock, missed the morning service, I'd quite like to watch it now, and they go online and it's kind of, oh, there's nothing there, just black screen, they'll be a bit put off. So that would be a downside of making it 3 hours.
If that's how it works, then that makes sense to make it shorter.
I'm not sure, it may be that it's smart enough to say once the YouTube stream has ended, then it may as well terminate the service. Another question is in the next bullet as well, that the chat facility on online church is configured to start 5 minutes before the service starts, so it's 5 to the hour, and continue to 5 minutes after the end of the service. Now, I don't know whether that means 5 minutes after the 1 hour 20 or 5 minutes after the YouTube stream ends.
Right. Yeah.
Another experiment we could do there. Yeah.
We found something interesting this week when I was watching from home. Basically, the chat isn't synced with the video. So if you're watching the video and you're half an hour behind, but the chat's still open, you're still seeing the chat from half an hour ahead. Because we were playing the heads and tails game, putting in heads or tails. And someone said, I'm not at that point yet. So they were getting it. But if you're watching Facebook or something like that, it times it all so you're getting the right chat as and when it happens.
Yeah.
It's just
there is a digital DTV setting in Church Online, which I think affects that. So essentially, you can force people to view in real time, which isn't very friendly, but it means you wouldn't get into that situation.
Yeah, I suppose Facebook's a lot more advanced, so it probably has the ability to keep track of what the chat was doing at a specific time. Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? Because you then might reply to someone and say, I violently disagree or something like that, and you wouldn't hear anything back.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know how that would work. But yes, it's just an interesting thing to note.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm not even sure how raw YouTube chat works on that front. Be interesting to know that.
No, that's a good point. I don't often watch live streams on YouTube.
No, me neither.
Interesting.
Then there's the video URL is the thing from YouTube that gets configured in, and there's a specific button for YouTube, so it understands YouTube. Well, for video URLs, it's we'll see that in the configuration. Then there are two text blocks essentially. One is a set of notes for the audience, standard stuff saying about the church and more information and blah blah blah. And then the host info is for hosts. Given that the only person that hosts it that I know of is Peter, that's a bit of a waste of time at the moment. But if we get more hosts in the future, then we can put standard information in there for them to access. And then there's date and time. So again, so this is actually effective because I think this will be what switches Church Online from viewing the playlist top item to viewing the current service at that time. Although when you go live at 5:02, that does appear on Church Online, so there's a slight bit of wiggle room there. Cool. Is that reasonably clear?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Yes, likewise.
Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. And I may have misrepresented some of the details here, but I thought I'd try and draw this picture just to get my mind around it. So the top, we're doing an 11 o'clock service here. The top line is the schedule for the online church. So that's saying it's 11 a.m. and it runs for an hour and 20 minutes, finishes at 12:20, hard stop. The chat is 5 minutes before and 5 minutes after. And I'm assuming at the moment that 5 minutes after runs until, by default, until after 12:20, so it's 12:25. But I'm not sure about that, as we'll see in a minute. Then the YouTube stream, you actually schedule a start time, or you list a start time in the configuration, but it doesn't actually go live until you press go live. And indeed, you can go live before that time or after it. But it just continues indefinitely then. It streams on until you end the stream. So there's no configuration that says it's an hour long or anything like that. Then the actual stream is quite interesting. You'll be aware that when you first go to YouTube and go to the service, you get a preview and you can actually see what's coming through from the encoder. And that's a dashed line here. And then when you click go live during the countdown shown in blue there, then the stream starts and runs until you press end stream. So that's the actual physical stream, if you like, the thing that's stored on YouTube. And then that's propagated out to online church with some kind of latency. And it's probably not as extreme as I've shown there, but I just tried to make the point that if you had quite a high latency, then the countdown might overlap 11 o'clock. It might still be counting down at a minute past or 2 minutes past, that kind of thing, although it's unlikely. And at the end, there's latency as well. So it's it's good to make sure that the slide has come up that says thanks and see you next week, and then leave that for a little while, and then end the stream. I think that all then makes its way through to online church before the online service finishes. And then the dotted lines are really a question mark here. I'm not sure whether the online church broadcast formally continues until 12:20, and we show a black screen. I haven't hung around at the end of a service to find out. We could do that sometime. And similarly, the chat definitely is available 5 minutes before the scheduled chat, scheduled broadcast. But how long it actually runs to is anybody's guess. But it's at least until 5 minutes after the end of the stream has found its way through to online church. I suspect it's going to be 12:25, but we'll
yeah, it should be quite easy to check again. Next time at home watching, I'll have a look.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Are we aware of any complaints at all? I was partway through a chat and I just lost it. So have we got any feedback that you're aware of from any of the online congregation?
Yeah, I got a bit of feedback the other day, which someone was saying that the stream kept breaking up for them, and they had to refresh the browser several times.
Right.
Now, I'm not sure whether that's a common problem. They seem to have problems with their Zoom as well, so I'm wondering if they've got a flaky internet connection.
Yeah,
we've only had it once where there were problems, but I think it was an in-church problem because I think it was the host said there's a problem that we know about.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a bit at the end of the sermon. We lost like the last couple of minutes. So I was like, oh, that's fine. But yes, I don't know what that was.
Right. Yeah.
No feedback then about chat being cut off at the end, prematurely cut off at the end.
No. And in my experience, limited experience of looking at the chat, not much chat goes on at the end of the service. People are off to have their lunch or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe if our numbers grow or the audience changes, that might be more extensive.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
The only thing that would be interesting with that is if, for example, people are watching a few minutes behind, whether they try and then chat to say, thanks, that was great, whatever.
Yeah.
And they can't because it's cut off 5 minutes after the original stream stopped. I'm not sure. But
yeah, good point. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, and indeed, you could come in at, say, I don't know, 12 o'clock and start watching, and then be way out by the end of the stream.
Yeah, but I suppose you don't want people like maliciously chatting when no one's watching. Later on, you could end up with people putting chat on. That's not that they would probably. But
yeah, I don't think the chat is captured, so it would only.
Oh, is it not? Okay, it's just live and then disappears.
Yeah, I think it would only affect the people that are currently still online, which might be nobody. Yeah. Okay, that's the last slide, just to talk about the catch-up. I mentioned that it's a playlist with that title. If you go to ccwinch.org.uk and follow the catch-up link, I think it's the top left drop down takes you to catch-up, then you get a catch-up screen, and that's got a link to the playlist. So that's the kind of low-tech version of catch-up. The other option is to go to live.ccwinch.org.uk, and when there isn't a service live, that will display the first stream in the playlist, regardless of whether that's been streamed or not. So that needs manually editing after a service to move that service to the top of the playlist, so that, for instance, someone that comes along at 3 o'clock in the afternoon will see the 11 o'clock service by default. And that's a bit of a faff at the moment. It requires someone to remember, typically Craig or I, but it's certainly something we might want to move away from if we can find a better solution. And similar,
yeah, okay. Probably look into whether you can actually force them to order in a specific way. I'm not sure.
yeah, it seems
You'd
fairly
hope that you'd
limited.
be able to get the most recent one first, because there's lots of people streaming out there, so there can't be many people having to do it manually.
I agree. Yeah, there must be a solution. Yeah. And when you create a new stream and add it to the playlist, guess what? It goes to the top of the list. So if you have 10 services, they'll all be at the top of the list, and then they need to be moved down to avoid clobbering the top one, as it were.
Excellent.
Yeah. So lots of fun. So that's the end of that. Any questions on that?
No, that's fine, thanks.
That's fine, yeah.
Okay.